In order to complete a comprehensive study of violent video games in Australia, it is necessary to determine a number of key variables around the topic at hand. These will include a description of the intended purpose of the game, the effect of the classification given to the game, and the game's ability to affect or otherwise alter any thought patterns or processes for those exposed to it. It would also be useful to understand the type of games that are in fact banned in Australia and the reasons for their banning. There are many different types of violence when it comes to video games. One of the most popular and damaging forms are survival horror types. They're teaching the player to survive through the form of killing or injuring others. This graphic gameplay encourages players to think that brutality is necessary. This belief is reinforced in fighting games, which generally consist of two players versing one another with the aim of gaining dominance over each other. This again suggests that authority is measured by physical power and sets a terrible example to young children, who may be playing these games if they are not rated appropriately. Lastly, another violent video game type that can be destructive to players is storyline games, which generally give players the responsibility of keeping others alive by using cruelty. This gameplay imposes the idea that violence relates and leads to heroism, and can set the example that praise will come from viciousness or cruelty. Through setting this belief, players are taught that violence is a beneficial and suitable behaviour to turn into times of need, and also enforces the idea that it is the only option. All of these well-known types of video games have the potential to negatively affect those playing them, and need to be closely and responsibly monitored by those creating them. Video games have been shown to affect the human brain in many ways. Some doctors say that with pro-social video games, it leads to helpful behaviour between humans. Studies show that this can also lead to positive brain development. Violent video games, on the other hand, shown from multiple studies, indicate that it leads to negative consequences of a person's brain and mental health. Negative video games can lead to addiction, aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviours of a child. How? Well, it is proven that neurotransmitter called dopamine that is involved in learning and feelings are affected when playing video games. Studies have shown that dopamine is released when a person plays a video game. With the release of dopamine, stress hormones are also released, which can be related to ideas of violence, harm, and negative thoughts in order to succeed and win the game. Not only that these games can negatively impact a person's brain with thoughts of violence, but also that with the addiction of killing in order to win at the game is destructive to the human brain. Negative impacts on children on violent video games. When children are playing violent video games, they get immersed into the video game, becoming the main character. This environment allows them to enable virtual killing, stabbing, and perform other violent assaults. In these violent video games, children become rewarded when they perform these tasks through missions, achievements, etc. If they're getting rewarded for the violent attacks in the virtual world, this can cause them to look at the world in a negative way. Another negative impact on children on violent video games is disrespect to women. Games such as Grand Theft Auto, as a main character, you are capable of performing sexual acts, assaulting, and violent activity with the females in the game. Another impact is children exposed to inappropriate sexual content at a young age. Another impact, explicit language being exposed at a young age. Children pick up many words or quotes that are repeated several times to them. They store it in the brain, and they are likely to express that same quote. Video games are banned in Australia due to a number of reasons, but most are banned due to both high or extreme violence and graphic sexual content. Some of these games are Left 4 Dead, Manhunt, Bully, and Saints Row. Games like all media are reviewed by the Classification Board. This board decides what ratings are given to the games and other media, and these games were deemed to be of nature, and that was not acceptable here in Australia. Some of these games were initially released here and in other countries, but were banned and removed from stores. Australia has maintained a level for video games to combat the events that have happened in America, with a lot of school shootings being blamed from the games that the individuals played before the shootings occurred. I believe that the Classification Board should maintain the standard that they are setting in how they choose to ban these games, as they are of an obscene nature and not just for our society. All violent video games should be rated R18+. Violent video games affect children in many ways. They later display aggressive behaviour once they're exposed to violent video games. In 2012, the Guidelines for the Classification of Computer Games announced the introduction of an R18+ classification. While this was introduced, it raised the impact test from strong to high, allowing for more violent video games to be sold in Australia. Although the classification has been raised, the control of whom these games are sold to needs to be put in place. This is an important step as it ensures that minors are protected from inappropriate content. With this being the highest classification, parents need to ensure that they are purchasing the age-appropriate games for their children and are mindful of what they are viewing. Despite the fact that tougher laws have been brought out in the classification of violent video games, there needs to be stricter and stronger laws as the drift of video games is being shifted over to alternative electronic gadgets that will result in the same effects for our next generation. When it comes to developing games, we must understand when to draw the line. Violent video games come in a range of possibilities from fantasy to virtual reality. However, it is what can be found in these games that deem them violent. As citizens of Australia, we must recognise and develop an extensive method of censoring violent games from younger viewers. On that will coincide with the already in place guidelines for the classification of computer games. Not only physically damage you, but also mentally, for it has the possibility of leaving you in a state of fear. This is not a major issue, thankfully, in Australia, for there are already a number of banned video games. We must continue to protect our children by recognising what to censor and what to ban.